We were so close, by the way, to like a full professional setup today, but the second boom arm that I ordered was again too small. Even though online it said 70 millimeters, it was 65 millimeters from top to the base of the little circular disc.
Nice. Do you think that it was measured out by Luke?
Hopefully he's not listening.
He is definitely not listening.
Do you know what's banter though? Is that like I bought a phone stand thing that says it only has a tolerance of 6 millimeters, but it fits on the desk simply because like the little hook thing is like long enough to kind of hook it under and then bring it back, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So like the other one, just because it's such a stubby little clamp, it's too small, so I can't like hook it under because it just has to clear the 7 millimeter like drawer, like the bit that goes around the edge of the desk. So frustrating, man. Honestly, like I think I've returned
Life's a lot easier
things.
without the. Yeah, I mean, you should have just returned the desk and got the other desk.
Nah, I mean, I'm happy I got this one because it came with a drawer, and I'm happy that I've got the drawer, and it actually looks nice. Like, I'm happy with the way that it looks. I'm happy with the way it performs. It's just, you do your research, and you're like, this is the best thing to get, and then that tiny little detail that fucks you up. It's just like, by the way, no clamps that you buy regularly through things are actually going to be able to fit this desk because it has such a weird fucking setup. It's almost like they didn't think about it.
I mean, they probably just thought, let's make a desk that has a drawer in it so that people can have a desk with a drawer in it. Most people aren't podcasters. Most white boys aren't buying our desks.
That's fair.
How are you feeling post rant? You feeling good post rant?
I'm feeling great post rant. I mean, look, the rest of it is so professional right now. I have my headphones. Did I tell you what happened with these? So what I'd done is like when I took them out, they peeled off the little bit that actually clips in, and that bit was still in there. And then I like kind of was just playing with it, and it popped out, and I was like, "Fuck!"
Yeah, that sounds like the sort of thing that would be quite annoying.
Yeah. But I got
lots of sets of headphone replacement cups gone through, but we've got a pair of headphones now that work and they're plugged in and you can hear me.
Yeah. In fairness, it was only one.
Fair enough.
You know, like as things could have gone, it could have gone worse. And I've got the webcam now.
Yeah, your webcam looks quite pretty. Everything about that setup looked nice.
Exactly, and it's lovely. And I've even hold on. Are you ready for this? Oh, what's that? That, my friend.
That ring light that I can just see in your lovely
in the back of the thing, which we won't put on.
No, keep it on. It looks great. It looks awesome.
I don't think it really adds to the experience like a great amount
yet,
but you can still kind of see it. Anyway, welcome to the Performance Proposition, everyone. The world's most
unsuccessful,
unprofessional sports podcast. Well, maybe not the most unprofessional. I don't know.
No, there are definitely worse podcasts for that.
There are.
But
yeah, welcome to this week where I haven't prepared.
Going back to the unprofessional point.
Yeah, don't worry. And I don't even think I have a joke for you because this week has been just stupid. And today especially. Like, it's mad how your car breaking down, like, first thing of the day when you haven't even got your coffee and you can just derail your whole day.
Yeah, I've never seen you look quite so lost. You only turned up like 10 minutes late as well. Like, it's not even like it was that bad, but
I wasn't even 10 minutes late. That's the thing. I was still 10 minutes early.
And you just walked around with an air of.
Do you know what? Like every morning, Im says to me, like, you know, why do you need to go in that early? You're not coaching until 7:30. Why do you need to leave the house at 6:30? And I'm like, for this. This is why. So when I go out to my car and I spend loads of time scraping the ice off it because it's unexpectedly frosty in the morning, and then I turn it on. I wait for it to warm up while I'm scraping the ice, and then I get into it, and as I go to pull off, it feels like something's fallen out of the back of it.
Problematic start to the day.
Very problematic start to the day.
But we're here now, and life is good. Life is excellent, and I did prepare. I did do a read. I read an article a review article on the application of repeated sprint training, basically looking at the repeated sprint training in terms of definition, adaptations, training variables, and application.
Love it.
So there's quite a lot actually to go through. It's quite a big article, so it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world that there wasn't a second article to cover today.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's just edit out the first. We planned this. Zab read a really big article and I didn't on purpose.
Yeah, no,
so
and it was really good of you actually to just let me take control of the week because I've been feeling in need of some attention.
Fair enough. Well, the floor is yours.
Awesome.
So how's that?
So repeated sprint training.
Yes.
Basically, it's just a high intensity interval training modality. It's primarily based, the scientific definition of it is that you are working at maximal intensity for under 10 seconds and then you're resting sub-maximally. So you're resting for just anything under a minute.
Okay, so it has to be under 10 seconds, and the
Under 10
rest
seconds of
has to
work,
be under a minute.
under a minute of recovery time. That recovery
Interesting.
time can be passive or active. And then it's just repeated sets of, well, repeated reps of that or rounds of that, depending on how you want to define it.
So like a classic 30 on 30 off is not technically
No, so
repeat sprint
that
training.
would then fall into the category of short bout, high intensity interval training, basically. So yeah, in terms of so that's the key definition. The authors are basically talking about the fact that its use alongside other cardiovascular modalities and energy system training methods is probably going to be quite useful in a multifaceted program designed for athletes who aren't necessarily massively bothered about top end speed and are more interested in developing either aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, repeated sprint ability.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the sort of athletes that we're looking at. So it's like
What
squash
sort of
players, tennis players, basketball players, football players,
yeah.
maybe people
Well,
that are looking to improve their running speed on aerobic activities, maybe
yeah.
hybrid athletes as well.
Probably certain football players as well, right? Not
Yeah,
necessarily all of them.
not the lazy ones, not the goalkeepers.
They will love that.
Yeah, I've got a friend who was a goalkeeper, and yeah, I mean, the most impressive thing I ever saw him do was poke a hole in a glass bottle on a night out with a finger. That was, but like, other than that, I don't know what his athletic capacity was actually like. Shout out to Simon Flower. So the primary benefit of modalities of training like this is that they can currently develop multiple different fitness components. It's going to improve your maximum speed, it's going to improve your aerobic capacity, it's going to improve your repeated sprint capacity, and it's going to improve change directional speed and also potentially even jump height. The improvements can be seen within as little as 2 weeks with 6, 10 to 20 minute sessions over the course of that 2 weeks, so 3 sessions a week. And yeah, that's kind of like the two kind of primary benefits. It's like quite quick in terms of how fast you'll see adaptation, and it's going to have a wide range of training adaptations as well, and probably combine all of those things and unify those things in a way that's going to be beneficial to sports that require all of those key.
Yeah, well, it's going to be very specific to sports where you do lots of quick, short, high intensity sprints.
Yeah.
Right.
So the next bit that kind of touched on before going into the adaptation side of things was that obviously it's quite an advanced strategy. You're looking at running at top end speed and you're looking at a reasonably high amount of intent of volume at that top end speed. So if you haven't trained top end speed, it's not going to lead to a huge amount of benefit. And if you aren't capable of tolerating that, it's also going to potentially cause injuries. So you want to build up to it in a way that's a bit sensible. So typically what they tend to recommend is that you do it in your specific preparatory phase of your pre-season as opposed to your general. And in your general, you work on traditional sprint training and aerobic capacity and maybe some longer bout high intensity interval stuff to kind of prepare your body for the demand that's then going to be placed on it in that specific phase of training.
Yeah.
So that's the brief introduction, the Zab style introduction, obviously.
Excellent.
Then we go into the adaptation process itself, right? So when it comes to the adaptation, we're looking firstly at what the stimulus is and then what the adaptations we're going to see off the back of that are. So the key stimuli that we're going to see, the acute demands that are going to be placed on your body, your heart rate's going to be pretty high. You're going to be somewhere between 80 and 90% of maximum heart rate. You're going to be relatively high in terms of your VO2 max percentage as well. So you're going to be somewhere around 70 to 80% on that. It rises pretty quickly within like kind of 3 repetitions of sprints, but you're not going to see a huge amount of time in either of those 2 training zones. So in terms of like the aerobic adaptation, you're probably not going to see as much adaptation as you might see with other strategies that do put you into that zone for longer periods of time. It's primarily going to be an anaerobic stimulus because the fact that it's using your phosphocreatine system to a massive extent, it's using your glycolytic system to a massive extent, and you see that in the buildup of kind of lactic acid pretty early on in your workout. But again, the internal load's going to be quite low because the total duration of time that you're spending in those high intensity phases is going to be pretty low throughout. So it's kind of, when you think about it, it reflects across to kind of cluster sets and energy density training type work within like a strength training modality. Pretty similar to that. So think about it like that when you're kind of comparing it and thinking about how you're going to program those sessions. There's a high amount of neural demand, and you can kind of see that because of the fact we see a drop in your kind of counter movement jump performance after repeated sprints. And you also see, like, over the course of the set, you see a worsening in terms of leg spring. And so you're going to see reduced vertical stiffness. You're going to see an increased kind of displacement of mass as well. And on top of that, you'll see like altered stride mechanics. So you're going to see an increase in ground contact time, a reduction in stride frequency, and a reduction in stride length.
Yeah. I mean, it's also intuitive in the sense, right, that like if you're max efforting anything, it's going to incur like a pretty significant neural stimulus.
Yes. Well, it's going to incur a pretty significant neural stimulus, and if you're not recovering maximally, it's also going to incur a pretty significant metabolic stimulus, and both of those things combined are going to lead to detrimental outcomes in terms of performance output in
Yeah.
later rounds and later sets.
Yeah.
So, depending on what you want to get from your session, you obviously want to change like how you approach programming. So, if you really want to focus on development of top end speed over metabolic outcomes, you probably want to make sure you're resting for a little bit longer and maybe doing less sets and having less rounds of sprints per set, more sets, so that you're preserving kind of performance per a sprint.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas
And
like
that's where it differs really, isn't it, from like you said, max like top end speed training, is that it's not necessarily about achieving your absolute max end speed like for as much volume as you can. It's kind of about trying to run as fast as you can despite the neural and the metabolic fatigue as it builds up.
I think again it kind of depends. It depends a little bit on how you approach it, right? So in the same way as like energy density training, aren't necessarily, you don't have to do it in a way that increases the amount of volume you're doing at maximum intensity, but you could change the parameters slightly to encourage like more like you to get closer to that top end intensity and top end volume. So obviously longer rests. Maybe so if you were to do 3 5 second sprints every minute, you could probably get away with doing those all at pretty much maximum intensity, resting for 4 minutes and then repeating that and doing that 3 times through. Like you're probably going to get pretty close to maximal intensity and maximal volume. And then if you start reducing the rest periods down, or you start increasing the number of rounds or repetitions you do of sprints per set, then you're probably going to see a slight impairment of performance and a slight drop down in terms of intensity. But with time and with exposure, you might actually see that you can preserve intensity near enough maximal.
Yeah.
And it's just playing around with it. So if you want more of a metabolic stimulus, then you probably don't need to care too much about how you're performing each set and about the drop off per set. But if you want more focus on kind of development at top end speed, you probably want to give yourself enough time to recover between sets and focus on how the form looks, how well the athlete's moving.
Yeah.
To make sure that they're still preserving that.
Yeah, like that's really the main purpose of that modality of training, right? Is like in a football match, in a basketball match, in a squash match, you're probably not going to be at your top end speed for a significant portion of the match. But what you are going to be doing is you're going to be running at about probably 70 to 80%, like pretty often. And it's that like recovery between those bouts, like for like let's take Man United at the moment, right? And the 3-4-3 system that Amarin wants to run, and having those wing backs that are essentially covering the length of the
I like
pitch.
how salty you came across as a Man United fan just then.
Well, there's no salt. It's just
It's just facts.
It's just facts.
Yeah.
Just facts, man. Stop it. But yeah, you've got those two wing backs that are like covering the length of the pitch and running up and down and running up and down. And like they're unlikely to be at their true max speed at any point of that. But what they are is running about 70 to 80% to follow the play up and down and make sure they're always in position in transitions and things like that.
So I think the point being made is that you can actually use this particular modality of training to train closer to top end speed, so closer to 90-95%, even 100% of top end speed, and develop performance at that top end speed. And you'd kind of use more short bout high intensity work like the 30 on 30 off that you were talking about, if you're looking more for that metabolic improvement. So it's kind of more so the actual outcomes. Let's go into the outcomes and then we can kind of talk through it. The chronic outcomes of repeated sprint training like it's consistently shown to improve 10 meter, 20 meter, 30 meter sprint times by up to 2 to 3%, which traditional sprint training improves it by 3 to 5%. So it's slightly worse than traditional sprint training in terms of maximizing like top end speed, but it does increase top end speed, and it does it better than high intensity interval training, small sided games, plyo training, and agility training all do. It's got positive outcomes for counter movement jump performance as well. So it's actually been shown to improve your ability to jump. And on top of that, it's got morphological adaptations as well. So you see increases in the size of your leg extensors, so your quads primarily, and you see an increase in fascicle length and potentially even muscle thickness of your bicep femoris. And that's looking at a study that was looking at some rugby league players during their off season, just using sprint training as opposed to kind of eccentric,
Yeah.
focused kind of hip extension.
Yeah. And for all the slightly less informed gym bros out there, biceps femoris is a quadricep, not
Is a
a bicep.
hamstring, not a bicep.
Is it?
Yeah. So bicep femoris
Wow.
is
There you go.
yeah.
Shoot me.
Biceps
I'm
always
gone.
bend the joint, but yeah. So the bicep femoris, like the kind of key thing on there is it's a really hard muscle to train. It's really heavily involved in sprint performance, change direction, deceleration as well. It's got a high risk of injury, and one of the things that was kind of brought up was that actually potentially, so long as the load is managed effectively, repeated sprint training might be a really good way to expose it to load that it's going to experience within a sporting setting and reduce injury risk
Yeah. Yeah.
and injury occurrence within a season. But the thing around kind of increasing the fascicle length is really interesting in terms of obviously increasing speed generally. So like the longer your fascicles are, the greater capacity they have to shorten quickly, because the distance that they'll shorten per unit of contraction is greater. So that's an interesting outcome, but one that you'd expect. But the one that you wouldn't necessarily expect is the increase in muscle size, which, like,
I mean,
everyone's
are
talking
we?
about doing slow controlled movements, eccentric focused exercises, working end ranges, and actually you're seeing big amounts of adaptation in terms of increases in muscle mass and increases in muscle
Yeah.
size
And
from
when we're
sprint
talking
work.
about that, it's probably going to be driven more mechanically by changes in fiber type, so like transition between like a type 2 B to like a type 2 X, right? Probably a little
Yeah,
bit of that.
potentially a little bit of that, potentially, but also just because of the heightened force demands as well. Like, you think you're trying to accelerate a human mass through space, like particularly if it's quite a big athlete like the rugby players that we're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about in this particular study. They're like force equals mass times acceleration. If you've got a big heavy lump of a human being trying to move as quickly as possible, they're trying to produce quite a lot of force with every
yeah,
single
yeah.
contraction. So the mechanical tension isn't sustained over the course of the rep for a long period of time. There's still a good amount of mechanical tension and mechanical work being performed by the
Yeah,
muscle.
if
So
you equate it across like area under the curve sort of thing for the whole training session, you've probably got quite a significant amount of mechanical tension if they're doing say 10 repeated sprints per set.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
The other outcome, I've said before, like aerobic improvements are going to be relatively limited because of the fact that you're not spending a huge amount of time in any particular work zone. But actually, there's still a reasonable amount of improvement. I think it was like 2.2. Yeah, a 2.2 fold increase. Sorry, not a 2.2 fold increase. There was a 2.2 increase in VO2 max associated with it.
As in like the units of VO2 max.
Yeah, which is milligrams per. Let's have a look. Let me remind myself because of the fact it's just slipped from my memory. If we look, it is. Yeah, we're not even halfway through the study yet, by the way.
Lovely. There was someone with a Garmin somewhere shouting, "It's milligrams per minute." I actually don't
It's
know.
it's milliliters per unit per kilogram body weight. I'm pretty sure, but I just want to double check before I say something stupid online. So milligrams, sorry, milliliters per kilogram body weight per minute square per minute, basically. So how much
Okay.
fuel is being utilized by per minute per kilo body weight. So yeah, and yeah, you see an increase basically in VO2 max, which is quite a useful thing to see.
Yeah.
The kind of argument is that, like, obviously you're not putting your heart and cardiovascular system in terms of delivery under a huge amount of strain, because of the fact you're not spending a huge amount of time within any of those work zones. But because you have like a rapid drop in or rapid utilization of your phosphocreatine system and a rapid utilization of your glycolytic system, you're going to see an increase in mitochondrial biogenesis. You're going to see an increase in kind of the enzymes associated with those glycolytic pathways. And as a result, you're going to see increased uptake and increased utilization of oxygen at the site of the cell. So although you're not necessarily able to deliver more, you're able to utilize more, and you affect that end of the equation for
Yeah.
VO2 max.
But then also, and again, this is just me sort of spitballing based on like sort of knowledge without reading into it and refreshing. But you're also, if we're talking about area under the curve for mechanical tension, there's also quite a significant area under the curve in terms of time spent in heart rate zones, probably at or above 75-80%, right?
So, but that's the point. It's like most kind of hit training research basically says you want to be spending several minutes in those heart rate zones in order to improve VO2 max. And actually, we're looking at spending less than a minute in those heart rate zones per
Do you think
set.
overall you'd be
Yeah, yeah,
spending
yeah.
less than a
So, like
minute?
when you
Yeah.
think about it, you're looking at.
How
So
many
when we
how
get onto
many
like
reps
the
per
actual,
set?
so typically what we're looking at is we're looking at 4 to 6 sprints per set.
Okay.
So each of those sprints is going to be somewhere between kind of 3 and 10 seconds. So if you're looking at a 5 second set or a 6 second set, you're only really looking at 36 seconds of work, and only 3 of those rounds are going to be above. So only 18 seconds of that is going to be spent in your heart rate zone. So that's the kind of key argument being made. And obviously you've got the recovery time between sets, so your heart rate's still going to be elevated a little bit between, but the actual demand being placed or the dose being applied is going to be substantially lower than you would expect from like a long bout or
Yeah,
short bout high intensity interval session. So
that's fair.
if you're actually doing intervals and pushing into that zone, you're going to be spending like
More
7 minutes, 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes in that zone versus 1 minute, 2 minutes in that zone with
Yeah,
this sort of modality of training.
yeah. But
But
that's
so that's
pretty.
that's the,
Yeah,
yeah, that's the reason why it's like it's gonna be less beneficial from a cardiovascular output perspective and more beneficial from an oxygen utilization perspective, where you have got an increased demand at the cellular level to produce energy. So the uptake of oxygen to produce that energy and to buffer against lactate, etc., is going to be a really important thing. So yeah, and then the other one was obviously it's going to improve repeated sprint performance, like regardless of whether you're doing that with a RAS test or a yo-yo test or whatever. It's like, I mean, if you're doing repeated sprints in your training, you're pretty certain that it's going to improve
yeah. It's like
repeated sprint
doing
capacity.
it's like doing lots of squats and not improving your squats, or doing lots of bench and not improving your bench, or jumping a lot and not improving your jump. You're expecting that the thing you're doing, if you're doing it at an adequate enough intensity to elicit a stimulus and a response from the body, then it's going to improve, right? Just conscious of time as well. How far
Yeah.
through the study are we?
We are getting onto I mean, the training variables are pretty straightforward for us to kind of work through, and then the
Yeah,
application's pretty straightforward for us to kind of talk about. To be honest, it's not, yeah, it won't take too much longer. It's probably going to be another, yeah, we'll see, but
yeah,
I'm sure we'll be fine for time.
yeah. I've got a great what angered Zab and Matt on Instagram this week to follow this study.
Okay, perfect.
So
We'll have time for that, I'm sure.
yeah, we'll do a little bit of that.
Cool. Speaking about that, then let's move on to the training variables themselves. Kind of going to go over volume, training frequency, program duration, number of repetitions, number of sets as the kind of main ones. Sprint distance, rest time, and rest modality are things we can kind of touch on as well. But yeah, so from a volume perspective, what we're typically going to see is somewhere between 200 and 800 meters of sprinting per session, 400 to 2,000 meters per week. So the recommendation seems to be like, okay, you're going to do 2 to 3 sessions, 1 to 3 sessions a week, and it's quite similar in terms of programming volume to plyometrics. So you know how you've got like a beginner will do 1 session a week, and they're not going to aim for more than 100 jumps. In this scenario, you're looking at someone probably doing somewhere around 400 meters of sprinting in one
Yeah, yeah,
session,
yeah.
and that being the only repeated sprint stuff they do over the course of their week, and then trying to split that and increase that over time over more sessions, just so they can increase total volume in a way that's kind of safe and sensible. But 1 session a week for most beginners is going to be enough. The lower training volume is going to be recommended during your during your in season, because the fact you want to maintain performance but minimize fatigue, and you're more likely to see higher training volume in pre-season when you're actually trying to promote adaptations. And then in terms of what they've kind of, you know how I hate this particular thing, but their stated kind of peak metrics for weekly training load is that you're going to get an optimal outcome from 1,200 to 1,400 meters of sprinting a week.
So everyone do 1200 to 1400 meters of sprinting per week.
Exactly.
That's what's recommended. If you're going to do it, do that exact amount, regardless of who you
Matt,
are.
please, you're breaking my brain. The reason I hate it is because of the fact it's like you have every single individual is completely different. What your previous training load has been is going to have a massive impact on what your current training load needs to be and what's going to be the optimal thing for you and your outcome. So if you're not doing any sprinting, jumping to 1200 meters a week or 1400 meters of training a week could potentially be fine, but would probably be too much in most cases, and you might get more optimal results from doing slightly less. Anyway, moving on from training volume, we'll go to training frequency. So as I said before, like 1 tends to be enough to maintain fitness, 2 tends to be enough to promote adaptation, 3 tends to be what they recommend for kind of top end athletes and primarily in short shock cycles. So it's like if you're looking at doing like a 2-week cycle prior to a competition and you want to bring everything together in that short shock cycle, 2 weeks, three sessions a week, 6 sessions over that time, somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes of sprinting, and you'll get a pretty decent dramatic increase in outcome. Again, they're very specific metrics that are being given, and they're all levers you can play around with and adjust. But that's the training frequency thing covered for them.
Will we be putting like a little summary of this in like the session notes? I don't know if we actually ever upload these.
We have we've got a whole capacity now to write a series of notes, and I can upload the file that, yeah,
Excellent.
I put together. I might even try and put together a little PowerPoint presentation to go with this, because I think it's probably a useful thing for us to start doing, and might be a way for us to start actually getting some content out there for coaches who want to improve.
Yeah, and I'm not promising anything, guys, but there may be an email, a weekly email
I mean, that would be delightful,
at
wouldn't
some
it?
point. Stop it. Continue.
Program duration. So realistically, the evidence kind of shows that 2 weeks is enough for you to see pretty decent adaptations, pretty close to maximal adaptations from a repeated sprint model. 6 weeks is kind of the top end that they've seen kind of benefits for. Again, it's one of those things where what happens at the end of that 6 week period is quite important, right? If you just expose someone to the same stimulus for 6 weeks, chances are they will start to plateau. But if you kind of changed any of the metrics even slightly, would that shift things further? Probably. So if you do quite like doing repeated sprint stuff, then by all means do it, but maybe think about switching things up every 4 to 6 weeks slightly, whether that's changing the distance of the sprint or the amount of rest you're having between sets or the type of rest you're having between sets or what have you.
Yeah. And in terms of like decay of the adaptations, like what are we looking at in terms of, if I want to maintain it, is it enough to do like a 6 week cycle, let's say, and then kind of go on to other training and just give enough of a stimulus to the muscles to maintain it, or does it drop off? Like, what's the decay like?
I mean, speed stuff tends to be something that decays quite quickly, right? When we think about like the training residual effect of across different fitness components, speed does drop off relatively quickly, but like it doesn't take a huge amount to maintain, right? If you're doing some top end sprinting, you're probably going to retain sprint performance. If your goal is to retain kind of glycolytic capacity, again, the glycolytic enzymes will denature quite quickly. And if you're not promoting the more production of those enzymes, then your anaerobic capacity is going to drop down quite quickly. So you probably need to be providing yourself with some form of stimulus that increases anaerobic capacity, but you could do that by replacing repeated sprint stuff with some kind of longer sprint on an exercise bike or something along those kind of lines.
Yeah. That's fair. So, I mean, basically, as is the case with so many things, easy come, easy go.
Easy come, easy go, but also easy maintain.
Easy maintain. Yeah.
You don't need to do. It's that whole thing of like the amount of work you need to do to increase performance in an area versus the amount of work you need to do to maintain performance in an area is significantly different. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's that whole thing of if you're going into a competitive season, you probably want to do some sprint training in your week between competitions. Like that could literally be like a single session with 3 sets of 3 different types of sprints, and that would be enough to maintain performance outcomes. The next one was kind of around the number of repetitions, and the key thing that they said here was that 4 to 6 repetitions tended to be the perfect amount for most people because of the fact you're going to still be able to maintain top end performance. You're not going to end up degrading like yeah, you're not going to end up breaking down in terms of your form, but you're also going to promote enough of a metabolic response to actually lead to positive adaptations in aerobic capacity and anaerobic capacity in that range. Like, obviously, if you're the sort of person that can continue doing near enough top end sprints for 10, 20 reps, then go for it. And if you're the sort of person that your form starts to break down on the fourth rep, then probably stop there. It's all about just kind of assessing yourself or the athlete you're working with and figuring out what you're looking to get from the session and how to judge when they're done. In terms of the number of sets, again, it's like the number of sets recommended is somewhere typically between 2 and 3 sets per session, because by doing more sets, you're going to spend more, like that second set, that third set, you're going to spend more time in that top end work zone. So the first set, the fatigue will start to kick in, the metabolites will start to accumulate over those first three reps. But then in those last 3 reps, you'll actually start to get some aerobic and anaerobic benefit.
Yeah.
In that second set, that's when you're going to start spending more time in that heart rate zone, in that VO2 zone, and that's when you're going to see greater adaptation. So like maybe the final four reps in that set, or the final 5 reps in that set, you'll already be there in that zone. So you'll spend more time there, and then again in the third set, same thing, same principle. And then sprint distance, pretty straightforward. If you are sprinting for less distance, you're going to have more of a focus on acceleration, less of a focus on top end speed, because you're not going to get anywhere near top end speed in the first kind of 3 to 4 seconds of the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working for a longer period of time, you're going to get closer to top end speed, but you're also going to fatigue more over the course of each rep, and therefore you're going to need to have more recovery time between reps, or reduce the number of reps you do to make sure that you're not losing out on form and top end speed towards the end of each set. Rest time, shorter rest, obviously more metabolically demanding, longer rest. It's easier to preserve intensity. Whatever your focus is, think about how you're going to manipulate rest time. And again, rest modality, is it going to be passive rest or is it going to be active rest? If it's active rest, you're going to struggle to maintain intensity throughout the course of the set, but you're going to have a bigger metabolic demand and a greater VO2 outcome and aerobic capacity outcome. So what you want and what you get is going to be based on that rest modality.
Fair enough.
The final variable was sprint modality. So there were like 3 key sprint modalities they had. It was either you did linear sprints, so you just ran in a straight line. You did shuttle sprints, or you did multi-directional sprints. If you're doing linear sprints, you're going to get closer to top end speed because of the fact it's easier to achieve top end speed running in a straight line. If you're doing shuttles, you're going to get better change of direction. Similarly with multi-directional stuff, yeah, it's going to be more demand. Both of those are going to be more demanding on both. They're going to increase eccentric load. They're going to increase the neuromuscular demand, but they're going to reduce top end speed outcomes. Yeah, think about that. And then it comes into kind of application. And I think application we're almost better off kind of talking through, because the findings in the study are pretty similar to what you would genuinely expect. If you were thinking about what you want someone to do in the off season, what would you say at this point, realistically?
What I would want to do someone in terms of repeated sprints, or just generally?
So generally, but like also like in terms of the repeated sprint training itself.
I mean, you'd be looking to push the adaptation, because they've got more space to recover. So you can probably go a little bit harder at them. Probably do some stuff closer to high, like right up there in terms of intensity. You can probably push the volume a little bit more because you've got more capacity to play around with recovery and have longer recovery times and things like that. So you'd be looking to just basically push the variables up and try and get some of their performance outcomes up here, so that when you hit the next in-season, you can drop it back down and do more maintenance stuff there, right?
So when we're talking about off-season, we're talking both. You're kind of talking and combining both off-season and pre-season into that one category.
Sorry.
But like, no, that's fine. It's like it depends on where you look and what you look at, right? But like, so the pre-season stuff, that is when you want to be increasing the intensity. That's when you want to be increasing the volume. That's when you want to be thinking about all of those things. The stuff that they kind of mentioned around off-season stuff is, at that point, you just want the athlete to do something that's going to stop them from losing everything when they're in their 2-week break at the end of the season. So it's just
minimal volume,
minimum effective dose, basically. Just do 3 sets in one session, do some linear sprinting, do some multi-directional sprinting, do some shuttle running. It's all pretty much, pretty straightforward.
Yeah, basically.
And then as you go into that preparatory phase, you've obviously got your general preparatory phase and your specific preparatory phase. in the general preparatory phase, they're saying you don't necessarily want to be doing a huge amount of repeated sprint training stuff because you want to focus more on the poles. You want to focus on max speed and max endurance capacity. So the max endurance capacity stuff you're going to be working in on just kind of zone 2 work, but also some kind of longer bout, high intensity training stuff. And then the top end speed, you're just going to do some traditional sprint training. And then as you move into your specific training phase, you might start thinking about incorporating more repeated sprint training and actually exposing yourself to a decent amount of training load in that particular modality, because that's when you're going to be preparing yourself and really kind of getting ready for in-season performance. Over the competitive period, minimize work, just again similar to the off-season. And then the final thing they kind of brought up was kind of injury rehab and return to play. So obviously if you've had an injury, like it's quite a useful way to start exposing yourself to the demands of your sport without necessarily playing your sport and within a relatively safe environment, right? If you're just running on a treadmill and you're doing max effort sprint stuff on a treadmill, it's going to be a little bit safer than multi-directional training on a pitch where someone might be trying to take you out in a rugby game or something.
And I guess with like return to play and like even like in terms of if you've not really done this sort of training before, preparing yourself to do this kind of training, like all of this doesn't have to be up at that super max effort. If you want to prepare yourself for it, you could, run at what is an 8 out of 10 for you and slowly either push the speed up or push the volume up, like that, like you can sort of ease into it in that regard. Like,
so I think
it's flat out, right?
I mean, it's that whole thing of there are lots of purists. So when it comes to the science, because of the fact you want to have something that's clearly defined, what you're saying there, like they wouldn't necessarily class as repeated sprint training. They'd probably just class it as some form of HIIT training. But equally, it's the same as like what is a plyometric. The amount of people arguing and nitpicking over what a plyometric actually is when it comes to the science, when actually all you really need to think about is, okay, right, am I jumping? Am I trying to move explosively? Am I trying to do this? What you're saying is absolutely right. Like if you are trying to prepare, you can prepare by either doing a lower intensity work or lower volume. So you could just it's the same as like doing pure traditional sprint training where you're doing one sprint in every 4 minutes. And then you start gradually trying to do maybe 2 sprints in every 4 minutes, maybe 3 sprints in every 4 minutes. Same sort of principle, right? You're just going, okay, right, instead of pulling that lever, I'm just going to drop the intensity down slightly, work at 85%, work at 90%, work at 95%, work at 100%, and build up that way. But yeah, both are good options for kind of transitioning from that GPP phase into that SPP phase. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much everything that they covered within the article. I realised that I've spoken at you for quite a long period of that, but I hope it was,
No, it's all useful, mate. And like I said, we will endeavour to put some sort of summary into some sort of session notes so that if you did get lost listening to the doctor magician that is Xavier over there, you can go back and just double check your notes. Cool. Yeah. So,
sweet.
Should we transition into what Anger does on Instagram? Just very briefly.
I mean, I would love to hear what angered you on Instagram this week.
Well, I mean, it didn't necessarily anger me, but when I saw it, my first instinct was, what's Zab going to say about this? So I saw a video and it was basically someone talking at a camera and they went, if your coach is just doing 20 minutes of cardio with you in your session, that's a useless PT session and they're being lazy. Thoughts?
Oh man, do you know what? I understand coaches that think that because of the fact I've been that coach, but it's at the end of the day, it's what does the client need, right? If the client isn't going to do that 20 minutes of work with you, on their own, but they will do it with you, then it's beneficial for the client to get that if that's the thing they need. Like if they're the sort of person that will quite happily go off and do their bicep curls and do their squats on their own, you can send them their program for their strength training session and trust them to get on with that. If you know that if you send them over their cardio workout, they're not going to do their cardio workout, then you doing the cardio workout with them is probably a useful way to do it. And whether that's zone 2 monostructural work or whether that's some kind of like circuit training stuff that's not necessarily even. We were talking in the gym the other day. There's these 2 women that come in the morning that are absolutely phenomenal. The two skippers.
Yeah. I know those.
And they come in and if you watch them from the outside, you just go, oh, they do the same workout every single time, right? Because they come in, they get their kettlebells, they set themselves up, they've got their little piece of paper, and they follow the workout, and probably do the same thing 3 times a week. And like the number of people that are like, why do they just do the same thing in the gym? And it's like, well, if you took that and you applied that to a runner who just goes out and does 3 5Ks a week, as part of their training, you'd be like, well, why are they just doing the
Why are they
same
just doing
thing
the same
three
thing?
times? And it's if your energy system training doesn't look relatively similar, it's quite hard to judge your progress on it because you're just realistically what you're looking at in a scenario where you're skipping, doing swings, doing planks, doing press ups, doing burpees, what have you within your circuit. If it's consistent, you can go, okay, right, I'm increasing the number of reps I'm doing, I'm increasing the amount of weight I'm lifting on each of these things slightly. It might not look like anything to the outside viewer, but actually, at the end of the day, this is beneficial, right? If I'm programming and I'm working with a client and I get them on a treadmill or I get them on a bike for 20 minutes during the session, I can still adjust so many different variables on a
Yeah, yeah.
treadmill, right? I could go, okay, right, we're going to increase running speed, we're going to increase running incline, we're going to work on cadence. We're going to work on ground contact time. We're going to think more about bringing your heel up towards your bum as you're running to try and.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's so many
You
things
can.
that I can work on as a coach with a client in that way, and it might not look like a huge amount to someone just looking in, but actually it's still really beneficial. It's still the sort. It's actually probably more beneficial for most clients than coming in and doing a strength training session.
Yeah, and
So
I mean, I think it just takes a like just to clarify, there are coaches who will put cardio in because they can't be bothered to do the rest. Like with all of this stuff, a lot of it does come from founded. We're unfortunate enough that our profession is not necessarily regulated as well as it should be, but I also think people forget that we are predominantly facilitators and educators as opposed to like providing some sort of magical, I don't know, value service when people come in. It's like the main value that we provide is, like you say, getting them to do the work that they need to do to hit the goals that they're trying to hit. So if you facilitating them doing like 30 on 30 off on a bike because you're there going, just do it, come on, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, bam, okay, rest, breathe, nose, mouth, okay, go again, bang. Like, in a way that if they were there on their own, they'd probably just go, this is too much. I'm sacking it off after 3 reps. I'm not doing my full six. And although it looks like you're not doing a lot, you're actually providing more of a service than like potentially you standing there watching them squat with perfect squat form. You're going, yeah, good squats, well done.
like it's
You know,
also
like
it's the whole thing of it. I know coaches that have used that time as their check-in time, right? So okay, your check-in time should be part of your service. Your check-in time should be part of your product. But if the coach is coaching someone for an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes, and 20 minutes of that time is then chatting on a cross trainer, checking in, talking about how they've got on with different goal actions towards the training week, what's going on in their life that's stressing them out, that's potentially leading them to deviate from the actions they actually want to take. Like that 20 minutes is still really useful coaching time. So yeah, it's I mean
yeah,
it's just a bullshit post, but
yeah,
like
no, exactly.
most
As with most of Instagram.
yeah.
But there you go. Anyway, that's all I had. I
I
just
mean,
thought it was an interesting topic of conversation because it does pop up a lot, and people tend to have that perception. Like you watch someone coach someone else, and you see them not doing a lot, and you think, oh well, they're just sacking it off. But in reality, like we say, there is so much that you can be doing in that time.
the other one that I always find interesting is like, have you ever had someone turn around to you and go, "Oh, but you just do the same thing with all of your clients"? Like because they just happen to see you with three of your kind of more strength training focused clients. So the guy
Yeah,
like the powerlifters you have, like, and they go, "Oh, well, that person just does squats, bench press, and deadlifts, and that's the kind of the main structure of their session. They don't really seem to do very much else, and that's all their coach seems to do with them." And it's like people are very, very quick to observe something, not necessarily understand what's being changed, not understand what's being programmed, not understand how the coach is working with that client, what that client's going through, and just go, that's all very samey, all very easy, all
yeah,
very,
yeah.
and it's like,
But it's assuming that that's the only work that's being done in the week. So
but
like,
it's also assuming that the sets and reps and intensity and everything is the
yeah,
same, right? Like, it's like, okay, right, so I do a bench press, like we do bench press in a session. You've seen me do bench press with one client. You've seen me do bench press with another client. You've seen me do bench press with another client. You go, oh, just does bench press with all these clients. But one of those clients is doing 5 reps every 4 minutes, maybe doing some mobility stuff in between, maybe not, maybe just focusing on maximizing bench press like strength. Another client's doing it for hypertrophy, another client's doing it as part of a circuit or doing some energy density training on it. And it's like all of those, there are so many parameters that can change even without changing an exercise.
yeah. Yeah.
That
Well, I mean, come back to your point before about runners. It's like going up to a running coach and being like, all you program is running. Why don't you program anything else? And you're like, well, people come to me to get better at running. And this is the most effective way to get better at running. People come to me because they want upper body strength. And the most weight that I can move in my upper body is a bench press. So there's going to be a form of bench press in everyone's program, probably. Like if that is a part of their goal is being stronger in the upper body, it will be in most people's program. And unfortunately, the general population in terms of what they need and what they want, it's not very complicated, and you don't need a lot of exercises, and you don't need a lot of huge variation between people to achieve very different goals.
Anyway, that's that rant over. That's that topic over. But yeah, no, no, that was good.
Cool.
Hope you guys all enjoyed the episode. I realised it was a bit more me ranting about a particular study and saying things that sounded a little bit complicated and forgetting a term that was quite annoying.
Well, and me calling a hamstring a quadricep.
Yeah.
Which
we'll forget
edit that out.
I don't know. I might just edit that out, but edit that into a post on its own.
Oh, just have it as like a 3-minute loop of me going, for all the gym bros out there that don't know, a bicep is not your bicep, it's your quadricep. No, Matthew, it's a hamstring. Shut the fuck up. I'm just gonna go.
It clearly happens to the best of us. It's right. You've had a tough week. We've both had tough weeks. It's been a bit of an intense one. So yeah.
Cool. Well, let's wrap this up.
Cool.
And we'll see you next week. Possibly actually at Zabs rather than online all the time.
Yep.
But remains to be seen. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Matt.
I'm not leaving.
Not leaving. Well remembered. I don't even know how to press stop. How do I press stop?
This can go in the outtakes.
That's why. You were lower down than you needed to be. I couldn't even see the stop button.